Well, the 2025 season for the New York Mets is over, and the change has already begun. Welcome back into another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. That is Jack McKessie. I am Chris Schubert here talking all things New York Mets baseball with you. Jack, we let the dust settle. We let ourselves kind of gather our thoughts after the Mets season ended on Sunday. Kind of glad that we did, because the day that we're recording this, the Mets have made wholesale changes to their coaching staff, and we begin the process of turning the page on 2025 and getting into what 2026 might look like. How are you, my friend?
I'm feeling more optimistic, I guess, than I was right at the end of the season. I feel like the vision is not necessarily in focus for 2026, but the route that ownership and the front office is deciding to go towards is starting to round into shape, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the coaching changes, which was the start of what I think is going to be a very lengthy and newsworthy offseason for the Mets. But before we do that, let's tie a bow on the season itself, because this is our first chance getting together since the Mets went down to Miami, the Mets went down to Miami, lost 2 of 3, and found themselves on the outside looking in. Didn't get to play the role of the Cincinnati Reds going to L.A. and losing the first 2 games of that series. That's what the Mets would have done, so it wouldn't have mattered if they got in. But obviously, we would have much preferred that than the alternative. And Jack, I think my overarching thought, and I think I'm different from a lot of other Mets fans, because I have seen this opinion of this is worse than 2007. This is an all-time collapse. The reason why I can't get there personally is just because we watched 3.5 months of this team play this way, so it's not surprising. Like, part of 2007, part of a collapse is the sudden nature of it. This was a slow-moving car crash for 3.5 months, so my disappointment kind of happened in slow motion. So by the time we got to Sunday and they didn't score a run in Miami and couldn't win a game after they got the result that they needed in Milwaukee with the Brewers beating the Reds, there wasn't really any disappointment left for me to offer, because it had been disappointing for 3.5 months.
I totally agree. When that Clay Holmes performance in game 161 happened, and it was like that moment of, maybe it's worth getting my hopes up, I just kind of remembered the history of the Mets playing the Marlins in the last game of the season, and the history of how the team has played since that June 12th date that a lot of analysts and fans have pointed to. And it's just like, this just felt like more of a relief. I felt more relief, I think, when they lost and it was just all over, because it just felt like an inevitable thing for so long. Like, it wasn't like in 2007 they were up 7 games with 17 games left. Like, that is a team that should, by all accounts, have made the playoffs. This team was out of the division race with like 30 games to play. And like the wild card race, the fact that it came down to the last couple of games in a National League that the last seed won 83 games, like, let's be honest, Chris, this team didn't deserve to be in the playoffs. They didn't play for the last 3 months of the season like they deserved to be in the playoffs. I didn't think of this as really a collapse so much as this team just wasn't that good, and they played like a not playoff team. They played like the Chicago White Sox from June 12th on.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. They didn't deserve it, and they weren't playing like a playoff team, and they weren't in a position in August. They weren't in a position in September like they were in 2007 with a 7-game lead with 17 games to go. This was just a slow descent into madness, a slow descent into being irrelevant and being a team that, let's face it, just wasn't good. They didn't play complete baseball really for any meaningful stretch after the All-Star break. They couldn't put all of the pieces together. It was a rotation that had underperformance. Guys ran out of gas. They didn't reinforce that at the deadline. They trusted 3 rookies to try to save the day. A bullpen that they got reinforcements, some of the best in the sport. Those weren't good enough. And an offense that on the surface, when you look at the names and the backs of the baseball cards, should have been good enough to carry the day, wasn't good enough to carry the day, and they scored no runs in their final game of the season when they had to have it to even put pressure on the Cincinnati Reds. They couldn't get a single run across. So it just, like I said, post All-Star break, it was everything not going the Mets' way. And even when they did try to be proactive, when they did try to make moves to save the season, they weren't good enough. Cedric Mullins wasn't good enough. The relievers that they brought in, the guy who led the NL in saves last year, had a tipping problem and couldn't be trusted in a big spot. The offense went missing for stretches in July and at the beginning of August. So it was a team that didn't deserve to be in the postseason. It was a team that wasn't good enough to be in the postseason. And trust me, there are plenty of reasons for that. The players deserve blame. The manager deserves blame. The coaches deserve blame. We're already seeing some accountability in that regard. David Stearns deserves blame. Everybody is culpable in what we saw this season. And if there's a silver lining to take from what happened at the end of the year and them missing the postseason, is if they made the playoffs and got knocked out by LA, the same way the Reds did. If they just swapped places, right? Freaky Friday, just swap spots, and they had the same result happen to them. I don't know if there would be the aggressiveness in the way the Mets are already approaching the offseason. And we'll get to every coach not named Antoine Richardson being gone from the Mets organization going into 2026 in just a second. But if they made the postseason and they fell short, would there be an urge to move on from Jeremy Hefner? Would there be an urge to move on from both hitting coaches? Would there be this drive? I don't know. It's New York. It's a big market. And when you fall flat on your face the way the Mets did, that's what requires the big change. And I think we all thought they needed the big change even if they went to LA and lost two games. So the fact that this happened the way that it did, I think left the team with no other choice, which, again, silver lining, I think they needed.
I 100% agree. I don't think, I'll just keep going back and saying, like, this team didn't deserve to be in the playoffs. And it almost felt like if they had won that game 162, if they had Freaky Friday'd, if they had ended up in LA instead of the Reds and still gotten beaten in 2 games, they could have rested on their laurels and said, well, hey, we made the playoffs. We lost to last year's world champions. Like, we did our best, but hey, maybe next year, maybe we can run it back, look a little bit better, hope that down the stretch things don't turn out the same way, and we can string together longer, impressive performances from our rotation or from our lineup, whatever. But at least we made the playoffs this year, right? Like,
right, yeah.
Fans, organizationally, that's something they can hang their hat on. And I think this punch in the face, this punch in the gut, to miss out on the playoffs by 1 game, not even like a tiebreaker to the Cincinnati Reds, you won 83 games, you didn't deserve to be in the playoffs at all. And I'm honestly glad that there's nothing to really fall back on other than, hey, the Mets really need to look themselves in the mirror and decide, is this the organizational structure in terms of the coaching staff that we want? Is this the organizational structure in terms of how the lineup looks that we want? Is this the rotation look that we want going forward? Is this the bullpen? Is this XYZ? And to have them be forced to reckon with that so early and immediately, I think is a actually really good thing. And I'm glad in a way that they didn't make the playoffs because it has forced some of these decisions to get made quickly.
Yeah, you said like they have to look in the mirror and really address the root problem. And I think that's really my big takeaway is that they're going to have to really look under the hood at this core and decide if this is the core that they want to go to battle with over the next 3 to 5 years in this championship window that they're trying to create for themselves, right? They need to decide, is Pete Alonso somebody we want a part of this? Or is he a flawed player that really is a power first, hitting first player that's going to need to be more of a DH, and we don't want to spend that type of money at that spot? Is Brendan Nimmo, a guy who we have under contract for the next 5 seasons, really somebody that we want patrolling left field when that core, those 2 guys in Alonso and Nimmo, plus Soto, plus Lindor, won 83 games and didn't get it done? And then we can talk about the rest of the offense being basically non-existent all season. Certainly we'll get into that as the offseason progresses, but it really forces them. I think it forces David Stearns to reevaluate some of the ways he does things, and I truly think he is going to clean up some of the holdovers from the Billy Epler, the Brody Van Wagenen era of Mets baseball, and you are really going to start to see him put his DNA, his fingerprints in. I will give him credit. He didn't use that as an excuse. I'm going to give it to him as an excuse. A lot of this roster are players that he didn't draft, he didn't sign, he didn't develop, he didn't give big deals to. So I think seeing what his vision fully looks like is going to be a central theme of this offseason. And we can transition this into starting to look ahead because the Mets have already decided to make a bunch of moves. I mean, it's everybody. If your name isn't Carlos Mendoza or Antoine Richardson, you no longer have a role on the New York Mets staff. Now, it's not all firings, right? Jeremy Hefner's contract expired. The Mets are choosing not to renew it for 2026. In the case of John Gibbons, the bench coach, he is stepping away. Glenn Sherlock, the catching coach, is choosing to retire from the sport altogether. So in terms of moves, they are getting rid of the 2 hitting coaches. That is a decision that they are making. Mike Sarbaugh, the third base coach, they are choosing to not bring him back. So those are decisions that the Mets are making. The same thing with Hefner. But it is new bench coach, new hitting coach, new pitching coach, new third base coach. I mean, it is going to be an entirely new coaching staff. And Jack, it is not lost on me that outside of John Gibbons, every single one of these moves is a coach that was a holdover from Buck, from Billy, from Brody, from that little era of Mets baseball. And this is now, I think, David Stearns and to a certain extent Carlos Mendoza getting to put their fingerprints on this coaching staff. We love Hef, and that's the one that I'm kind of most uneasy about. But I do see that after you fail the way this team did, Stearns didn't get to pick any of these coaches. Mendoza had a bunch of holdovers. Now he gets to pick his guys, and I can understand with the way that this year went, wanting to do that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Jeremy Hefner move is the one that definitely surprised me the most. And also allowing Desi Druschel to speak to other teams as well. Like, they're kind of just gutting the whole pitching operation at the major league level. But like you said, this team, there was so much holdover from previous eras, and it was surprising in a way when they hired Mendoza to have so many guys retained in the coaching staff with Xavi, with Jeremy Hefner, and Jeremy Barnes came in and maybe tweaked some things, and Xavi was moved to assistant manager or whatever, but I think they needed to change their vision going forward, and I think the best way I can point to that as far as pitching specifically is this is a team that their philosophy was throw stuff that's outside the zone and try to generate swings and misses, and that worked for 3 months of the season. The first 3 months of the year, that worked. But they, in the last half of the season, were not throwing enough strikes. They weren't throwing enough pitches in the zone and getting ahead early in counts. Hitters had seen enough film and practiced enough against these pitchers' repertoires to know what not to swing at, and the philosophy became one that resulted in a team that was close to the league lead in walks. I believe the pitching staff as a whole over the last 2 seasons was close to, if not the number one, in allowing walks, and we saw how much that bit them in the butt late last season in the playoffs with Sean Manaea, especially down the stretch. We saw how that bit them in the butt this year with how many walks allowed guys on base, resulted in pitchers getting pulled earlier because their pitch counts were elevated, resulted in relievers coming in with the bases jammed and having to get out of situations and not being able to do it. So I just think the whole philosophy from a pitching perspective needed to change, which is how I'm rationalizing that move. And then the hitting, we've complained about the hitting really all year because this team from the jump didn't look like the team that we had envisioned because of how talented the lineup was on paper. They just weren't performing. For most of the season, Juan Soto was having the worst year of his career with men on base, while he was having some of his best numbers with no one on. And I think that's kind of a hitting philosophy thing, an approach thing that wasn't getting corrected. And I mean, it's a perfect encapsulation of the season that in the last game, the one that you need to win to make the playoffs and to give yourself something to fall back on this season, you go 0 for 8 with runners in scoring position and don't score a single run. So I just think the philosophies are so clearly not working, and they haven't worked for the last couple of years, that they just need to make a change. The pitching worked for the first half of this year, didn't work for the second half. The hitting last year didn't work for the first half, started to work in the second half. That's not good enough for a team that expects to be division and playoff contenders year after year. They need to have philosophies that work throughout the whole season and are able to carry a team to success that they did not experience this year.
Yeah, when you win 83 games and everything goes sideways the way that it did, nobody is safe, and I don't think any of us should be surprised that they decided to clean house entirely the way that they did. I think the reason why Hefner and his not firing, not bringing him back, choosing to not renew his contract, has Mets fans kind of uneasy and has me uneasy is there's just way more on the resume of success stories for Hefner than there are any of the other coaches on the staff. Like, Sean Manaea and Luis Severino having resurgence in their careers, I think, can be directly linked to Jeremy Hefner. David Peterson becoming an ace last year for this team and through the first half of this year. Jeremy Hefner played a role in that. Clay Holmes going from closer to starter that was more than serviceable for this team for this season. He deserves some credit for that. Griffin Canning being just awesome until he went down with an injury. Jeremy Hefner plays a role in that, whereas I don't have that same level of success stories with Barnes and Chavez because Francisco Alvarez needed to get demoted and get away from Eric Chavez to have a resurgence. It took Mark Vientos had a great postseason, all of a sudden got lost. And this isn't all on the coaches. The players deserve some share of blame here, but just like on the pitching side, it isn't just Hefner for the success. The players deserve a lot of credit as well. But it's just the resumes are so different that if you were going to make me pick somebody to bring back, it obviously would be Hefner. But with it being so bad, with the results being so poor, I can understand the scorched earth approach of, listen, we just need a complete reset. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Hefner was a holdover. Chavez and Barnes were holdovers. Like Carlos Mendoza now understands he's probably on the hot seat going into this year. He's going to want to go down with his guys now. He's not going to want to go down with holdovers of the previous regime. And I think that has a large part to do with this decision. And look, I mean, the Mets have a ton of stuff to do now. They not only have to completely rework their offense, their pitching staff, their bullpen, and make on-the-field changes, but they have an entire new coaching staff to bring in. And now, hopefully, Carlos Mendoza has some already existing ideas of who to bring in for these roles. I would love for there to be some ex-Met flavor. If David Wright wants the job, I would love for him to be the bench coach. If Carlos Beltran wants the job, I would love for him to be the bench coach. If any ex-Met has some tie-ins to be the hitting coach, I would have no problem with that. I think this group needs to get more modern. It needs to get younger. It needs to be more forward-thinking in this analytical age. And I think that's going to help Carlos Mendoza be a better manager because, listen, I don't think Mendoza had a great year. I think he had one good year and one bad year as a manager. So I think you say, okay, it's all on even footing. Now we're really going to evaluate you here on year 3. And so who he chooses to be on his staff, because he's going to have a say in this, is I think going to be really telling for his future here. So a lot of work to do. I'm not surprised, but it happening all at once on a Friday, it's like a Friday news dump. Like, here you go, everybody's gone. It's like, okay, like you've got a lot of work to do now, like a lot.
Yeah. I think the things that I keep coming back to are like for the pitching situation in Jeremy Hefner, like there were so many success stories in terms of reclamation projects or like Clay Holmes, just turning a reliever into a starter and having him throw a by far career high in innings, and even like through game 161 being able to give you 6 innings of work after you were a closer for so long. Like that's a success story for Jeremy Hefner, but at the end of the day, like that's one small piece of a bigger puzzle. Same story with Sean Manaea and Luis Severino last year, but like Kodai Senga coming back and not being able to throw strikes, and Sean Manaea coming back and not being able to have the same success he had a year before, and David Peterson hitting a wall and not being able to overcome it. Like at some point the results just weren't there, and that's just that there has to be some kind of fallout from that being the case. And it's the same thing with the hitters. Like, I mean, I don't need to go through everything, but like I look at Pete Alonso's numbers this year, and on the surface they look pretty good. They're good enough for him to opt out of this contract. 144 OPS plus, 871 OPS. But for a 94 game stretch there in the middle of the season, he had an OPS of 738. He was batting 230, and like if you're looking like a much worse hitter for more than half of the season, that's another thing that the Mets are going to have to start asking is this a guy that's worth bringing back, another year older, a little bit less fleet of foot, a little bit worse on defense? I just, there has to be some kind of change. And a lot of people I've seen already talking about for hitting guys, JD Martinez was someone who the Mets really valued last year, bringing in as a player, as a DH, who honestly it seemed like had more of an impact off of the field than he did on it in terms of getting guys on board with his philosophy and everything. And even recently, it's come up again. Mookie Betts apparently met with JD Martinez in August and is one of the best hitters in baseball since that meeting. So I wonder if the Mets go for a former player as a hitting coach if JD Martinez is one of the names on their short list in the future. We'll see.
I would love that. I would love JD back
fun.
on this team in that capacity. I mean, he certainly felt like an extension of the coaching staff last year even when he was struggling, it felt like everybody else around him was succeeding, and they were constantly pointing out JD's role of just being a sounding board and offering up tips, and just feels like he has a wealth of knowledge that he could share. And the other thing, too, that I think people associate with Hefner, and it's not fully true. I think there are some people out there that are worried that the pitching lab is now going to take a step backwards because Hefner is gone. The Mets vice president of pitching is Eric Yagers, who is like the genius behind the pitching lab idea. And so as long as he is still in the Mets organization and is in charge of their pitching philosophy from a top-down perspective, I think the Mets pitching lab is going to be fine. But yeah, it does hurt to lose Hef. I think he's the one that, if I would lose sleep over any of these coaches leaving, he is the one. But I totally get it. And I think at the end of the day, it was the right decision to clean house and move on. Before we get out of here, and by the way, we are going to have a full position group by position group review series coming up, starting with next week's episode. So we're going to look at the starters, then we're going to look at the relievers in a separate episode, the infielders in a separate episode, the outfielders in a separate episode. And we're going to batch record these because I'm actually going away for 2 weeks. So you're going to get a nice backlog of content. So if you're watching us on the YouTube side, and I am wearing the same sweatshirt for like 5 episodes in a row, now you understand why. But before we get out of here today, wrapping up the season and looking ahead, did you get a chance to listen to David Stern's end of season press conference earlier this week?
I did, yeah.
I want to get your thoughts because I appreciated the accountability that he took. He didn't put it on anybody else other than himself. Used the phrase, "I'm the architect. It falls on me. I built this team."
Plenty of time to build the roster.
Said all the right things in taking responsibility. But I also thought he very much told you the plan. Defense is going to be a major point of emphasis for this team, and that's why I don't think Pete Alonso comes back as the first baseman. I do not think Jeff McNeil is on this team next season defensively. I legitimately think they're going to explore a move for Brandon Nimmo out in left field because they need to get better defensively. They also need to get better pitching-wise. And for those of you out there who think David Stearns is going to go on a spending spree of starting pitching, I think he cautioned against it because he was asked about going out and getting a frontline starter, and he said, "I will explore everything, but the best thing for the New York Mets is for us to develop those frontline starters." He still continued to talk about the player development side. And so for those of you who think Framber Valdez is coming here on a big, massive contract, I just don't think it's happening. So your thoughts on David Stern's end-of-season media press conference?
I mean, I think you really said it. Like him taking that kind of accountability was impressive because it is very easy to say, you know, what we've said. He's inherited a lot of the coaching staff from a previous regime. He wasn't really able to have multiple seasons putting together a roster, and I think there was some additional pressure specifically at the first base position and Pete Alonso coming back because of how well he played at the end of last season, specifically in the playoffs. And then I'm with you. I think that it was clear that the philosophy is not going to change in a big way as far as how he wants to put the roster together and how Steve Cohen has said since he took over as the owner, which is, yeah, we're going to spend some money on free agents like a Juan Soto if the time comes when a guy like that hits the free agency market. We're going to make big splashes like that if we think it'll improve the team. But we talked about it at the beginning of the season. David Stearns does not sign starting pitchers to longer than 3-year deals. He does not sign guys older than 30 to free agent deals a lot of the time. He's going to focus on getting young guys developed and ready. And going back to what Steve Cohen said when he took over, like if the Mets want to look like their own East Coast version of what the Dodgers have been doing, that comes with developing a group of young guys, a core that they can build around. And they have Lindor locked up. They have Soto locked up. Outside of that, like they're going to be relying on some of these prospects and other young guys on the roster, your Vientoses, your Beatties, Acuna, you know, whoever they have, Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Ryan Clifford, like they're going to try to build their development to where it's at a level that those guys can come up and contribute in a similar way to how Nolan McLean, Brandon Sproat, and Jonah Tong were able to do. And I think, especially for the rotation, like those are the guys that we're going to be looking at as some frontline starters. Maybe not to start the year other than Nolan McLean, but certainly will have big roles in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of one of the points that you made, take Juan Soto out of the equation for just a second. The largest contract that David Stearns has handed out is a 3-year, $75 million deal to Sean Manaea. That's it.
Right. And that
Starting
was,
pitcher.
And that was like, it felt like a no-brainer at the time. It obviously
Right.
hasn't been great, but he was the ace of the last year's staff.
But I'm just saying, like, he doesn't give out big contracts. Like a 3-year deal, again, taking Juan Soto out of it, because I think it's fair to say he's an exception to the rule. Outside of that, it was a 3-year, $75 million deal for Sean Manaea. Pete got the 2-year, $54 million deal. He just doesn't Bleav in allocating large chunks and percentages of resources to free agents because most of the time they are flawed in some capacity. Age, talent level, positional value, all of it is taken into account. And so I don't think overall philosophically things are going to change. I think it is going to just be a team that is more in the vision of David Stearns. Like, I fully expect Jet and Carson to be on the opening day roster. Like, that's just my early prediction that Jet Williams is playing second base and Carson Bench is playing center field, and their up-the-middle defense is just lights out. Like, that's just what I anticipate.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good chance that they already are thinking about moving Juan Soto to a full-time DH spot because, like, that's part of the situation that they had to deal with this year was the right side of their fielding was Pete Alonso, who's a below-average defender, a amalgam of Jeff McNeil, Luis Angel Acuna, Brett Beatty, you name it, at second base, and then Juan Soto in right field, who is also a below-average defender. So it was like Luis Angel Acuna and the boys in terms of defense on the right side. Right. So I think they're going to need to evaluate, like, hey, is Soto really going to be your right fielder for the future? No, and they knew that when they signed that contract. I think now, with how poorly defensively this team played, especially in the final half of the season, they're going to have to start making decisions on balancing the defense with the offense.
Yeah, they may be more open to the idea of speeding up the process of Soto being the DH, which then I think kind of limits if you can bring back Pete, because I don't think Pete can be the opening day first baseman. I don't want to get too far ahead. It is still October. We're in the divisional series of the postseason. There's plenty of time. The Mets have an entire coaching staff to hire before then. But these are some of the conversations that we're going to have here on the podcast throughout the winter. But also, that David Stearns and company are going to be having as they try to piece this puzzle together. And I just think there's going to be an extreme emphasis on defense in who they target. And that is already the way that I'm viewing the free agent class this year. When I look at free agents for offense that this team could bring in, I am also looking at their defensive metrics from last year and their entire career, because I do think it is going to be the tiebreaker in many cases. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Bleav in Mets pod. We are back next week, 2 episodes for you. Pitching side of things, season reviews for the starters first early in the week, and then later in the week we'll have a relief pitcher closer conversation. If you are new here, rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you are listening to us. You want to watch the program over on the YouTube side. Jack McKessy, McKessy, the YouTube channel, where you can watch the show as well. Wrapping up 2025 next with our season in review for all of these players. Everybody that contributed in some capacity for the Mets in 2025, we will review here over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we'll break in if there's anything newsworthy that the Mets do on their coaching staff front, or if there's any roster moves that get made between now and the next time that we are back here on the show. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll talk to you all next week.